and brother have died. And so there's a link there from an early age, and then they notice each other again, and I think it's a love at first sight thing.
Back in 1995, a film roared into theaters that would shake Hollywood to its core. Mel Gibson did not just star in Braveheart, he directed it, fought in it, and bled for it. Critics debated it, historians questioned it, but audiences around the world fell completely in love with it. The story of William Wallace seemed simple at first, about a man who loses everything and rises up to fight an empire. Yet beneath that surface lay something far more complex. Now, decades later, the cast and crew are finally opening up about what really happened behind the scenes. Mel Gibson has shared the terrifying risks he took to make the film look authentic. The actors who fought in those massive battle scenes have revealed the pain, the injuries, and the unbelievable dedication it took to bring medieval warfare to life. The makeup artists have explained how they created wounds so realistic that people had to look away. The stunt coordinators have told stories about the most dangerous moments that almost ended in tragedy. From the hidden meanings in the costumes to the real locations in Scotland and Ireland that became the symbol for freedom, every single choice was made with purpose. The secrets behind Braveheart prove that making a masterpiece requires sacrifice, vision, and sometimes a little bit of madness. If you love movies, history, or just great storytelling, you need to grab your popcorn and stay tuned, because what you are about to discover will change the way you watch Braveheart forever. The battle that changed war movies. The opening battle scene in Braveheart is unlike anything audiences had seen before. When the two armies charge at each other across that field, the impact feels real. Swords clash, bodies fall, blood sprays across the camera. It is violent, chaotic, and completely overwhelming. To create this level of realism, Gibson made a choice that shocked the studio. He hired over 1,000 extras to play soldiers in the battle scenes. These were not computer-generated images. Every single person on that field was real. They wore heavy armor, carried real weapons, and charged into battle again and again. The scale alone was massive, but it was the way they fought that made history. Most battle scenes in movies are carefully planned, with each move decided ahead of time. Braveheart was different. Gibson wanted chaos. He wanted unpredictability. So he told the extras to fight like they meant it. Of course, the weapons were designed to be safer than real medieval swords, but they could still hurt. The actors wore padding under their costumes, but broken bones and bruises were common. Some days the medic tent was busier than the catering table. The Irish Army Reserve was brought in to help fill out the Scottish forces. These were real soldiers who understood discipline and how to move as a unit. Their presence added authenticity that trained actors could never achieve. When you watch those formations hold together before the charge, you are seeing real military discipline at work. When they break into chaos during the fight, you are seeing controlled fury that comes from real training. Gibson himself was in the middle of it all. He did not direct from a safe distance. He wore the same armor, carried the same weapons, and threw himself into the fight scenes alongside everyone else. There were moments when he took hits that were not planned. One extra got too aggressive and struck Gibson across the face. Instead of stopping production, Gibson wiped the blood away and kept filming. That moment of real pain made it into the final cut. The camera work during these battles was revolutionary. Instead of shooting from far away where everything looked neat and organized, the cameras went into the crowd. They moved with the soldiers. They captured the mud, the sweat, and the terror on people's faces. When a sword swings toward the camera and you flinch, that is because the camera operator was actually in danger. The cinematographer later said that filming those scenes was like being in a real battle. You never knew what was coming next. The sound design added another layer of horror. Every clash of metal, scream, and thud of a body hitting the ground was recorded and amplified. The sound team spent months making sure that every moment felt heavy and real. They studied historical accounts of medieval battles to understand what they actually sounded like. The result is a soundscape that makes you feel like you are standing on that battlefield. What makes the battle scenes in Braveheart so powerful is not just the violence. It is the way Gibson shows the cost of war. You see men terrified before the charge, friends die beside each other, and the aftermath, with bodies scattered across the field and survivors too exhausted to celebrate. These moments remind audiences that freedom came at a terrible price. The studio was nervous about how graphic the battles were. They worried that audiences would be turned off by the blood and brutality. Gibson refused to tone it down. He believed that sanitizing war would be dishonest. He wanted people to understand what William Wallace and his men actually faced. The studio eventually agreed, and the gamble paid off. Audiences praised the battles for feeling real in a way that most war movies never achieved. The Battle of Stirling Bridge is probably the most famous sequence in the film. Filming these massive battles took weeks. Every day started before dawn and ended after dark. The extras had to be in costume and ready to fight for hours at a time. Between takes, they would collapse in the mud, too tired to move. Medical staff were always on standby because injuries were inevitable. Despite the exhaustion and pain, most of the extras said it was the most exciting work they had ever done. They knew they were part of something special. The Battle of Falkirk, shown later in the film, required even more planning. This sequence involved horses, fire, and even more complex choreography. The stunt team worked for months to ensure that no one would be seriously hurt. Even with all the precautions, accidents happened. Horses stumbled, riders fell, fire spread in ways that were not planned. Each time the crew had to stop, regroup, and try again. The final result on screen looks seamless, but it took dozens of attempts to get each shot right. One of the most brutal moments shows a soldier taking an arrow to the chest. The effect was created using a combination of practical makeup and carefully timed choreography. The actor had to fall in a specific way to make it look real without getting hurt. The arrow itself was attached to his costume with a harness that pulled tight at the exact moment of impact. When done correctly, it looked like he had been shot. When done incorrectly, it just looked silly. They had to film that single shot 17 times before it worked. The mud was another major challenge. The fields in Ireland where they filmed were already wet, but the crew added more water and dirt to create the thick, clinging mud that would have been present on a real medieval battlefield. This made everything harder. Actors slipped, horses struggled to keep their footing, equipment got stuck, cameras had to be cleaned constantly. Yet this mud added to the realism in ways that a clean, dry field never could have. The reaction to these battle scenes changed action movies forever. After Braveheart, other directors tried to copy that raw, chaotic style. Films like Gladiator and the Lord of the Rings trilogy borrowed techniques that Gibson pioneered. In many ways, modern war movies owe a debt to what Braveheart accomplished. Looking back, the cast and crew agree that the battle scenes were the hardest part of making the film. They were dangerous, exhausting, and pushed everyone to their limits. But they were also the scenes that audiences remember most. It all happened because everyone involved was willing to go further than was safe or comfortable. They fought like they meant it, and it shows in every frame. The pain behind the blue face. Paint one of the most recognizable images from Braveheart is Mel Gibson, with his face painted blue, screaming at the English army. That image appeared on every poster and in every trailer. It became the symbol of the entire film. What audiences did not know was that the blue paint caused serious problems during filming. The paint was not a simple cosmetic choice. The filmmakers wanted it to look authentic, like the ancient Celts who reportedly painted themselves before battle. The makeup team made a special formula that would stay on during long hours of filming. The problem was that this formula irritated the skin. After wearing it for a few hours, actors would start to feel burning and itching. By the end of a full day of shooting, some had developed rashes and sores. Mel Gibson wore the paint more than anyone else. There were days when he had to keep it on for 12 or 14 hours straight. He never complained publicly, but the makeup artists noticed the damage it was doing. Between takes, they would try to give his skin a break by cleaning off as much as possible. Then, right before the cameras rolled, they would quickly reapply it. This constant cycle of applying and removing made the irritation worse.
And to understand what's going on all around her.
The blue paint also had to be reapplied constantly during action scenes. Sweat would make it run, blood effects would smear it, mud from the battlefield would cover it up. Every few takes, Gibson had to return to the makeup chair for touch-ups. This added hours to each day of filming. Cast members later joked that Gibson spent more time in the makeup chair than he did actually directing. There was also a historical debate about whether the paint was even accurate. Some historians argued that the Picts, not the Scots of Wallace's time, were the ones who painted themselves blue. Wallace lived in the late 1300s, while the Picts were from centuries earlier. Gibson knew this but decided that the visual impact was worth the historical liberty. He wanted something that would make Wallace and his men look fierce and otherworldly. The blue paint accomplished that goal. The extras who wore the paint had it even worse in some ways. Unlike Gibson, they did not have personal makeup artists to help them. They had to apply it themselves or rely on a small team that was responsible for hundreds of people. The quality of the paint varied, and some batches caused worse reactions than others. By the end of filming, many extras refused to wear it anymore. The production had to offer bonuses to convince people to keep painting their faces. Beyond the physical discomfort, the paint created practical problems. It stained everything it touched. Costumes, props, and even camera equipment ended up with blue smears. The cleaning crew had to work overtime to keep everything looking right between shots. Some costumes were ruined entirely and had to be remade. The budget for cleaning and repairs ballooned far beyond what anyone had planned. Despite all these problems, everyone agreed the paint was worth it. The image of those blue-faced warriors charging into battle became the defining visual of Braveheart. It made the Scottish fighters look united, tribal, and utterly fearless. When Wallace stands before the English army with his face painted and his sword raised, you believe he is capable of anything. That moment works because of the paint, even though creating that moment caused real pain. Mel Gibson later admitted that if he had known how much trouble the paint would cause, he might have looked for alternatives. But he also said that he could not imagine the film without it. The blue faces became too important to the story. They represented not just war paint, but a transformation. When Wallace paints his face, he stops being a simple farmer and becomes a symbol of rebellion. That visual metaphor was powerful enough to justify all the discomfort it caused. The speech that was never planned. The most famous moment in Braveheart is the speech before the Battle of Stirling. Wallace rides in front of his army and delivers a powerful message about freedom. The speech builds and builds until he screams the final word, freedom, and the entire army charges. That moment gives audiences chills every single time. What most people do not know is that the speech was almost completely improvised. The script included a speech, but it was much shorter and less emotional. Mel Gibson read it during rehearsals and felt that something was missing. With filming scheduled to start in just a few days, Gibson decided to trust his instincts. On the day they filmed the speech, Gibson told the crew he wanted to try something different. He asked them to roll cameras and let him speak from the heart. He talked about dying in bed as an old man versus dying on that field. He spoke about trading all the days from this day forward for one chance to tell their enemies they could take their lives but never their freedom. The crew was stunned. No one had expected Gibson to deliver something so powerful off the cuff. The extras playing the army were not acting when they cheered. They were genuinely moved by what they had just heard. Gibson did several takes, changing words and emphasis each time, but the core message stayed the same. In the end, the version that made it into the film was mostly from that first improvised take.
She just got married with the king's son.
The speech worked because it felt real. Gibson was not reciting lines. He was channeling the emotion of a man who knew he was about to lead people to their deaths. His voice cracked at certain moments. His face showed genuine pain. When he screamed freedom at the end, it sounded like that word was being ripped from his soul. That authenticity connected with audiences in a way that a polished, scripted speech never could have. Historians have pointed out that the real William Wallace probably never gave a speech like that. In fact, there is no record of what he actually said before battles. Gibson was not trying to be historically accurate. He was trying to capture the spirit of what Wallace represented. The speech became a symbol of resistance against oppression, and people around the world have quoted it in their own fights for freedom. The impact of that speech went far beyond the movie. It has been used in motivational videos, played at sports events, and quoted by politicians. The word freedom became a rallying cry that transcended the film itself. The romance built on real chemistry. The love story between William Wallace and Murren is the emotional heart of Braveheart. Their romance is sweet, innocent, and ultimately tragic. When Murren is killed by English soldiers, her death becomes the spark that ignites Wallace's rebellion. The relationship works so well on screen because of the genuine chemistry between Mel Gibson and Catherine McCormack, the actress who played Murren. Catherine McCormack was relatively unknown when she was cast. She had done some stage work but had never been in a major film. Gibson saw something special in her audition. She brought a gentleness to Murren that made the character feel real. She was not a damsel in distress. She was a strong woman who loved deeply and paid the ultimate price for that love. The wedding scene between Wallace and Murren is one of the most beautiful moments in the film. They marry in secret, in the woods, with only a priest and the trees as witnesses. The scene is quiet and intimate. There is no music, just the sound of their voices speaking the vows. This simplicity makes it more powerful. You feel the weight of what they are promising each other. Gibson and McCormack spent time together off-set to build their connection. They would go for walks and talk about their characters. They discussed what Wallace and Murren's life might have been like if she had lived. These conversations helped them understand the depth of their love. When they acted together, that understanding showed in small moments. The way they looked at each other, the way they touched. Every gesture felt earned. The scene where Murren is executed is brutal. She is tied up in the town square and her throat is cut in front of everyone. The camera does not look away. It shows her fear, her pain, and her final moments. This scene was hard for McCormack to film. Even though it was fake, the emotion was real. She had to tap into genuine terror, and doing that over and over for multiple takes was exhausting. Gibson wanted the audience to feel the full weight of her death. He knew that if people did not care about Murren, they would not care about Wallace's revenge. So he made sure her death was not quick or easy to watch. It had to hurt. That pain had to fuel everything that came after. When Wallace rides into that village and kills the soldiers who murdered her, the audience cheers, not because violence is good, but because justice feels necessary. The relationship between Wallace and Murren also highlights the personal cost of war. Wallace loses the woman he loves because of his defiance. His fight for freedom means he can never have a peaceful life. This tragedy makes him more than a hero. It makes him human. Audiences connect with that humanity. Catherine McCormack later said that working on Braveheart changed her career. The role of Murren opened doors that had been closed before. She went on to work in many other films, but she is still remembered most for this performance. The strength she brought to Murren left a lasting impression. The castle that played multiple roles. Many of the scenes in Braveheart take place in castles. These ancient stone fortresses provide the perfect backdrop for a medieval story. What fans might not realize is that several different castles were used, and some of them played multiple roles in the film. Trim Castle in Ireland was one of the primary filming locations. This castle is massive, with thick stone walls and towers that look like they have stood for centuries, because they have. Trim Castle was built in the late 1100s, which means it actually existed during the time of William Wallace. Walking through its halls, you can feel the weight of history. The production team used Trim Castle for many of the English stronghold scenes. The challenge with using real castles is that they come with limitations. You cannot modify them. You cannot add modern conveniences like electricity or heating. The cast and crew had to work in cold, damp conditions. Some parts of the castle were so dark that they needed powerful lights just to see. The stone floors were uneven and slippery. More than one actor twisted an ankle navigating the narrow staircases.
It's just a funny corner of history that I'd never heard of before.
Another issue was access. These castles are historical landmarks, protected by law. The production had to get special permission to film there, and that permission came with strict rules. They could not attach anything to the walls. They could not move or damage any original features. Every piece of equipment had to be carefully placed and then removed at the end of each day. This made setups take much longer than they would have on a regular soundstage. Despite these challenges, filming in real castles added authenticity that no set could match. When you see characters walking through those ancient halls, you are looking at real history. The wear on the stones, the way the light comes through narrow windows, the echo of footsteps in empty chambers, all of that is genuine. The production also used Dunsogly Castle for certain interior scenes. This castle is smaller and more intimate than Trim. Its rooms have lower ceilings and narrower passages. These tight spaces created a feeling of claustrophobia that worked perfectly for scenes where characters were trapped or in danger. The audience might not consciously notice the difference between castles, but they feel it. One of the cleverest uses of location involved filming the same castle from different angles to make it look like different places. By changing the camera position and using different rooms, the production could stretch their budget. A scene filmed on the east side of Trim Castle in the morning could look completely different from a scene filmed on the west side in the afternoon. Add some different props and lighting, and suddenly you have two locations for the price of one. The Scottish scenes required a different approach. While some of the film was shot in Ireland, the production also traveled to Scotland to capture the landscapes that Wallace would have known. The Scottish Highlands provided sweeping vistas of mountains, valleys, and lochs. These wide open spaces contrasted beautifully with the cramped castle interiors. The contrast between freedom and confinement became a visual theme throughout the film. One location in Scotland presented a unique problem. The weather was completely unpredictable. A scene might start in sunshine and end in pouring rain. The crew learned to work quickly, grabbing shots whenever the conditions were right. Some of the most beautiful moments in the film happened because they took advantage of sudden breaks in the clouds. That dramatic light you see in certain outdoor scenes was not planned. It was pure luck, captured by a crew that was always ready. The decision to film in real locations instead of building sets saved money in some ways, but cost more in others. Transportation, accommodation, and the logistics of moving equipment to remote castles added up quickly. The production also had to hire local workers who understood how to navigate these historical sites safely. In the end, the choice to go authentic paid off. The castles became characters in the story, silent witnesses to the drama unfolding within their walls. The horses that made history. The battle scenes in Braveheart would not have been possible without horses. Hundreds of them were used throughout filming, and each one had to be trained for the specific demands of a medieval war movie. Horses naturally shy away from loud noises, fire, and chaos. Teaching them to charge into battle required months of preparation and a team of expert handlers. The Irish Army provided many of the horses and riders. These were not Hollywood stunt horses. They were working military animals trained for discipline and control. This background made them perfect for the organized charges and formations needed for the battle scenes. The soldiers who rode them knew how to move as a unit, which added realism that would have been impossible to achieve with actors alone. Despite the training, working with so many horses was dangerous. A horse can weigh over 1,000 pounds and run at speeds of 30 miles per hour. When dozens of them are charging across a field toward each other, the potential for accidents is enormous. The stunt coordinators had to design every horse scene with safety as the top priority. Riders wore protective gear under their costumes. Veterinarians were always on set to check the animals for injuries or stress. There were still accidents. During one cavalry charge, 2 horses collided and both riders were thrown. One rider broke his arm, the other suffered a concussion. Production had to stop for the rest of the day while medics treated the injured. Mel Gibson visited both men in the hospital and made sure they were taken care of. Incidents like this reminded everyone how dangerous the work really was. One of the most difficult scenes to film involved horses and fire. In medieval battles, armies sometimes used fire as a weapon. The production wanted to show this but had to figure out how to do it without terrifying the horses. The solution was to use carefully controlled flames that looked bigger on camera than they actually were. Even so, only the most experienced horses and riders were used in these shots. Any sign of panic from a horse meant stopping immediately. The cavalry charges required precise timing. Horses had to gallop at full speed, stop on command, and wheel around for another charge. This level of control does not come naturally. It takes trust between horse and rider built over many hours of training. The military writers had that trust, but even they admitted that some of the things they were asked to do pushed the limits of what was safe. The relationship between the horses and the production team grew over time. Handlers learned each horse's personality and what they could or could not handle. Some horses loved the action and seemed to enjoy the work. Others were more nervous and had to be used sparingly. The team respected these differences and never forced a horse into a situation where it was clearly uncomfortable. Caring for hundreds of horses was a massive logistical challenge. They needed food, water, shelter, and medical attention. A full-time staff of grooms and veterinarians traveled with the production. At the end of each day, every horse had to be checked, groomed, and fed before the human cast and crew could rest. The welfare of the animals was never compromised, even when it meant longer days and higher costs. The impact of the horses on the final film cannot be overstated. Modern audiences who watch Braveheart on screens might not think much about the horses, but they were as important to the film's success as any actor. After filming ended, many of the horses returned to their normal duties with the Irish Army. Some were retired to pastures. A few of the horses that had performed particularly well were adopted by members of the crew who had grown attached to them. The bond between humans and horses during the making of Braveheart became one of the unexpected stories that cast and crew still talk about years later. The injury that almost stopped production. Mel Gibson was not just the star and director of Braveheart. He was also one of the most active participants in the dangerous action scenes. This put him at constant risk of injury. About halfway through production, that risk became reality in a way that nearly ended filming altogether. During a scene that required Gibson to fight multiple opponents at once, one of the stunt performers misjudged his timing. His sword, though designed to be safer than a real blade, struck Gibson on the side of the head with full force. Gibson went down hard. For a moment, no one moved. Then blood started seeping through his hair. The set erupted into controlled chaos. Medics rushed to Gibson's side while the stunt coordinator tried to figure out what had gone wrong. Gibson was conscious but disoriented. He was taken to a hospital where doctors determined he had suffered a concussion and needed stitches. The injury was serious enough that he could not return to work immediately. Production shut down for 3 days while Gibson recovered. This was a disaster for the schedule and budget. Every day of delay cost tens of thousands of dollars. The studio executives were panicking, worried that their star and director might not be able to finish the film. Insurance companies got involved, assessing whether Gibson was fit to continue. Gibson returned to set with his head still bandaged. He insisted on finishing what he had started, but the injury changed how the remaining action scenes were filmed. The production became more cautious. Stunt doubles were used more frequently. Fight choreography was adjusted to reduce the risk of similar accidents. Gibson chafed at these restrictions because he wanted everything to look as real as possible, but he understood the necessity. The injury also took a toll on Gibson's ability to direct. He was still experiencing headaches and dizziness weeks later. There were days when he could barely concentrate. His assistant director had to take over some of the less critical scenes while Gibson rested. Despite these setbacks, he pushed through, determined not to let the accident derail the film. Looking back, Gibson admits the injury was a wake-up call. He had been so focused on making Braveheart as intense and realistic as possible that he had not fully considered his own safety. The concussion forced him to find a better balance between authenticity and self-preservation. It was a lesson that probably saved him from more serious harm as filming continued. The final battle and ultimate sacrifice. The execution scene at the end of Braveheart is one of the most brutal and emotional moments in cinema. William Wallace is tortured publicly before being killed. The scene does not shy away from the horror. It shows Wallace stretched on a rack, his body broken, the crowd baying for his blood. Then, with his last breath, he screams, "Freedom, one final time." Filming this scene was incredibly difficult for everyone involved. Mel Gibson had to portray unimaginable pain while maintaining Wallace's defiant spirit. The physical acting required was intense. Gibson was strapped to the torture device for hours between takes. The position was uncomfortable, and he developed severe back pain that lasted for weeks after filming ended. The emotional weight was even harder. Gibson had to access a level of anguish and determination that felt real. He could not phone it in. Between takes, Gibson would stay in character, keeping himself in that dark mental space. Cast members later said it was unsettling to be around him during those days because he seemed genuinely haunted. The crowd extras in the execution scene had their own challenges. They had to portray people who were both horrified and entertained by the torture. This moral complexity was hard to act. Some extras felt uncomfortable with what they were being asked to portray. When Wallace screams freedom, it has to be perfect. Gibson did multiple takes, each one pushing himself further. By the time they got the shot they needed, his voice was nearly gone. That ragged, desperate quality you hear in the final film is real. He had screamed himself hoarse to get that moment right. The technical execution of the scene also required careful planning. The special effects team created the torture devices and worked out how to make them look functional without actually harming Gibson. Makeup artists designed wounds that looked gruesome under close camera scrutiny. Every detail had to be perfect because the camera would be right there, showing everything. The impact of the execution scene is impossible to measure. It is the moment where Wallace becomes legend. His refusal to beg for mercy, his defiance in the face of death, and that final scream for freedom elevate him from historical figure to symbol. Audiences leave the theater remembering that moment more than any battle or speech. It is the emotional climax that makes everything else matter. Braveheart is so much more than just a movie about Scottish history. From the brutal honesty of the battle scenes to the improvised speeches that became legendary, the filmmakers and cast poured everything they had into creating something unforgettable. The pain, the danger, the dedication, all of it shows in every frame. Decades later, Braveheart still inspires people because it reminds us that freedom is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. What do you think about the way Braveheart was made? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Do not forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more inspiring content like this. Before you go, kindly watch the other videos on your screen. Thanks for watching.